official website for SQL Server 2019 download. So there are some options here to try SQL Server on premises or in the cloud. So if you want to try it on premises, this is the trial version. If you want to try it in the cloud, then you have the option to go to Azure. But what we want the developer edition, which is free. There's also an option to download the Express if you wish to do so. Also, if you want to install SQL Server 2019 on Windows, Linux, or Docker containers, it tells you the way to do that here. But we are going for the developer edition. So I'm going to click on this button link to download the setup file for the developer edition. So I'll click on that and that should start downloading. You can see here it started downloading the files for the developer setup. This should not take too long, so I'll just give it a few minutes to complete. The download has completed. This is just a partial download. I'm just going to click on this to go to the download location. So I'll click show in folder, and this takes me to my folder where it was downloaded to. So this is what the file looks like. It says SQL 2019-SSE1-dev. You can see the size is not that much. This is just a partial installation. You still have to run this file to download the full installation files. When you download the installation files, it will prompt you for a default location. So I'm going to create a folder here where it's going to download the other components of the SQL Server installation. So I'm going to right click here in my downloads folder, go new, and I'm just going to click on folder. I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to call it SQL Server Download. So I've created this folder here inside my download file called SQL Server 2019 Download. So now that I have that folder created, I want to run this file that I initially downloaded. So I'll double click to run, and that will start up the setup files for the installation. So you can see here it gives you three options. You have the basic, the custom, and download media. Download media basically enables you to download the files so that you can later just run it from your computer or any computer you want to run the installation from. I'm going to go for the download media so that I have the option to install it later. It tells me to select the language. I'm going to accept the default package. So you have two options of packages you would like to download, either the ISO or the CAB. So I'm going to leave the default, which is the ISO. I'm going to browse to my downloads folder and just select the folder I created to download it into. So I browse to my downloads folder, and this is the folder called SQL Server. I'm just going to click OK. And you can see here on that select download location is now selected the folder I created. So it's going to download it into that. So once that's selected, I'm just going to click download for the download to begin. The download of SQL Server 2019 Developer Edition is now complete. So I'm just going to close this box here. It says, are you sure you want to exit? I'll say yes. I'm going to open up the folder that I downloaded the SQL Server 2019 into. So I'll double click to open it. You can see here it is a disk image file. So I'm just going to double click to open the content. So these are the content. To open up the folder that I downloaded the SQL Server 2019 into. So I'll double click to open it. You can see here it is a disk image file. So I'm just going to double click to open the content. So these are the content. So to begin the installation, I'm just going to double click on this setup file here to run it, and that should start the installation. This is the initial screen you get when you try to install SQL Server. And on the left here, it gives you the different steps that the installation is going to take. So the first step is basically the planning, where you just check to make sure that you've got the right hardware and software. If you want to do that, you can just click on this link here to take you to the hardware and software requirements. And there are different documentation as well, security documentation. If you want to read through it, you can. Now there is an important tool here which is called System Configuration Checker. If you run this tool, it will check to make sure that your system is ready to install SQL Server 2019. So I'm going to click to run this checker, and that will quickly run through my system and tell me if my system is ready or not. You can see here it says the operation is completed. I have passed 8. So it ran 8 checks and I've passed it. If you want to see the details, just click show details and it will tell you everything it has checked. And you can see here the status is passed. I'm just going to click OK to close this. So now I know my system is ready for the installation because I have passed all the hardware and software requirements. Next, I'm going to move on to the installation stage. So I'll click on installation. Inside the installation page, we have the option here to install new SQL Server, standalone installation, or add features to an existing installation. So if you already have SQL Server installed and you want to add features to the existing installation, you can still use this link. But I am installing a single instance of SQL Server, so I'm going to click on that, and that will launch the installation wizard. So this is the installation wizard. The first thing it'll ask is for a product key. It has detected that I'm running a developer edition, so I don't need a product key. If you were not running developer, you'll normally have to put in your product key there. So I'm going to accept and click next, and that will give me the next screen here. So I'm just going to check this box to accept the license agreement. You can see these are the various steps. I'm on step number 2, license terms, that I'm going to go through to complete the installation. So I'll click on next, and it will do some basic checks. It will install some set of files. So I'll just wait for it to finish. On this step of the installation here, I've had some checks here. It says I've passed 3 and failed 0. You can see here the one that I have a warning on. So it's just a warning about the firewall. This is not serious. It's not a showstopper. It will not stop the installation from progressing. If you want to see what it says, you can click on the warning thing here, and it just tells you what that says. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next stage of the installation. The next step is you are provided with this feature selection, so that you select the component you want to install for this instance. In this case, I only want to install the database engine services, so I'm going to check that. That is the only thing I'm going to check. If you look on the right here, it gives you the feature description, tells you what it is, what it does. You can also come back to add features once you've installed SQL Server, and then you have the instance. It tells you this is where it's going to install it, in the root of C program files, Microsoft SQL Server, and it tells you this is a shared feature directory. If you, for example, want to install all the features, you can click on this button and that will select all the features. But before you do that, make sure you do have sufficient disk space. So with the database engine services checked, I'm going to click next to progress to the next step of the installation. The next step is to give your instance a name. So this is the instance configuration. The default name for the instance is called MS SQL Server. I'm going to change that. I'm going to give it my own name. I'm going to call it SQL Server 2019. Make sure if you decide to change the default name of the instance, the name you give, make sure there are no spaces. The name you give your instance is also used as the instance ID. So I've given my name instance SQL Server 2019. The instance ID is also going to change to reflect that. All right, you can see it has changed. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next step, which is server configuration. So it's doing the instance configuration now. And once that is done, we've moved on now to the server configuration. So I'm just going to accept all the default that is there and click on next to move to the next step. So I'm going to click next to progress to the next stage. We are now on the database engine configuration page where you have to set the method of authentication to the SQL Server. The default is Windows authentication mode, which means whatever way you log into your computer, that will be used also to connect to the server. I'm going to select mix mode, which is a mixture of the Windows authentication and a SQL Server mode, but you have to provide a password to accommodate the SQL Server mode. Once you have entered the password and confirmed the password, you also need to add a user that has administrative rights. So I'm going to click on this button that says add current user. I'll click on that. You can see that has added the username I used to log on to this computer, which is administrator. So once that's been entered and we've entered the password for the SQL Server System Administration account, which is called the SA account, click on next. It then gives you a summary before it actually progresses with the installation. It tells you here ready to install. You can see here I've got 2 more steps, so feel free to read through the summary. If there's anything that's not right, you can change it before you progress. So I'm happy with everything. I'm going to click on install. It also tells you here the configuration file path. So I'm going to click install, and that will begin the installation. You can see it says installation in progress. So I've gone through all the steps. I've got just one more step to complete. The installation is now complete. So you can see here status says succeeded and tells you all the features it has installed. So I'm just going to click on this close button here to exit the installation screen and also exit this screen. The next thing to do is to check for SQL Server in my programs menu. So I'm going to click on start, and on the start here there should be a folder for Microsoft SQL Server. You can see here it says new Microsoft SQL Server 2019. If I expand that, you can see here it tells me these are all the things it has installed. So these tools are quite useful. We've got the SQL Server 2019 Configuration Manager, SQL Server 2019 Error Usage, SQL Server 2019 Import Export, SQL Server 2019 Installation Center. So these are very useful tools that will come in handy if you want to perform configuration or import stuff and also add additional features to your installation of SQL Server. In Studio, we're going to go to our Programs menu and look for the SQL Server 2019 folder, and inside that folder we should have a tool. So we've got Microsoft SQL Server 2019. I'm going to expand that, and we have this tool here that says SQL Server 2019 Installation Center. So if I click on that, it will launch the installation screen, and then from there we can download the SQL Server Management Studio. So this is the SQL Server Installation Center, which allows you to add components to a previously installed SQL Server instance. So I'm going to click on this installation tab here, and within the installation tab I'm going to click on the option that says Install SQL Server Management Tools. So if I click on this, it's going to take me to the download page where I can download it. So I'm going to click on that, and that will take me to the site that will enable me to download the SQL Server Management Studio. So it's trying to launch the site. So this is where it's going to take you. So I'm just going to scroll down, and you can see here there is a download link to download SQL Server Management Studio. It tells you the release number, the build number, release date. So I'm going to click to begin the download. You can see here the download has started here. So I'm just going to wait for it to complete, and then I will run the installation files. The download has completed. So this is the downloaded file. So I'm just going to click to show in folder, and that would take me to the location where it's downloaded. This is the location where the SQL Server Management Studio setup file was downloaded to. So I'm just going to double click on it to start to install it. So I'll double click, and that should bring up the installation page. So I'll give it a few minutes to load that page. So you can see here it's loaded the page and tells me the location. This is where it's going to install it, and there is an option to change the location if you're not happy with it, but I would recommend you accept the default location and then just click on this option to install. So I'll click on the install button to progress the installation. The time it takes to install depends on your processing speed for your computer. The setup has completed for the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm just going to click on the close button to exit. So if we go back into the start menu and locate the SQL Server folder, mine is called SQL Server 2019. So this is the folder. If I expand this, I should see a new component. You can see here it says Microsoft SQL Server Tools. If I expand that, we should see different tools that the SQL Server tools installed: analysis services, deployment, database engine tuning, and this is the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So if we want to interact with the SQL Server and log into it, we'll use the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So that is it for this video. We successfully downloaded and installed Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. On Start and look for my SQL Server 2019 folder, and the SQL Server Management Studio should be in there. So this is my Microsoft SQL Server 2019 folder. I'm going to expand it, and inside there we've got Microsoft SQL Server Tools 18. So I'm going to expand that, and inside there we have the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm going to double click to launch. If this is the first time you're launching the SQL Server Management Studio, it might take a while to launch. When the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio launches, this is the screen you'll see, and it gives you the option to connect to the server. So it has different options here. The first is the server type. So in this drop down here, there are different server type depending on the component you would have installed. I installed just the database engine, so that's the server type I'm going to connect to. If you have the others installed as well, these components, analysis services, reporting services, or integration services, if you have these components installed, you can also select them as the server type to log into. Next, it's the server name. So because I've got SQL Server installed on my local computer This is the name. So this is the name of my local computer, and this SQL Server 2019 is the name of my SQL Server instance. If for any reason your server name does not show up, there is a drop down here where you can browse for more. If you go to browse option, and if you click, there's a local server and there's a network. If you're in a network environment, then you click on network servers, but I'm in a local environment. So inside the local environment, you can see I've got database engine, which is the instance I installed. If I expand the plus sign here, you can see here, this is the full path of my server. That's my computer name. And this SQL Server 2019 is the instance name. So my computer has automatically detected the server name, so I don't need to add that. But if for any reason your server name is not populated, that is how you populate it. Next is the authentication. By default, you can use the Windows authentication to log into SQL Server. You can see here my username is grayed out and the password is grayed out. That's because I'm already logged into my computer. So SQL Server uses the same credentials to connect to the SQL Server instance. If I do not want to use the Windows authentication, there's a drop down here. If I want to choose the SQL Server authentication, then I will have to supply the login name, which is SA, and then the password, which I would have supplied during the installation of SQL Server. But I'm going to change it to Windows authentication. And then before I click on the connect button, there is an options tab here. I just want to show you. You don't really need to change anything here, but if you're in a network environment, your network administrators might change some configurations here or might want you to change it. But for the purpose of this video, and because we're in a local environment, there is no need to change anything. So if I click on this options tab again, it takes me back to the SQL Server connection button. So now I've got all my details in, the server name is in. I can now click on the connect button to connect to the SQL Server. So I give it a few minutes to connect. You can see it has connected to SQL Server. This area here is called the Object Explorer. The Object Explorer provides a user interface that is kind of like a tree view structure that you can use to manage the objects in each instance of an SQL server. You can also expand the pane, just drag it along. So you can see here, I've got some details highlighted here. We've got the name of the computer where the instance of the SQL Server is installed. And this is the name of the instance, SQL Server 2019. This is the version number, 15.0. And then we have the account that is logged in to the server, which is the administrator account for the local computer. You can connect multiple SQL Server instances and they will stack up here against each other. So if I wanted to connect to the same instance but using a different account, I can do that. So here, this icon here that says Connect Object Explorer, I can click on that and I can connect using the SQL Server authentication. So I click on the drop down, I select SQL Server authentication, and the username for that is called SA, and the password would have been the password I provided during the installation of SQL Server. I've entered the password. I can just click connect. You can see here is connected to another instance but with a different account. You can see here it tells me the account I've connected with, which is the SA account. It gives me the version number of SQL Server, the instance, and then the machine on which it is installed on. As you can see, it is possible to connect to multiple instances of an SQL Server. So to disconnect from a particular instance, while the instance is highlighted, there is an option here to disconnect. I just click on it and that will disconnect from the instance. If you want to disconnect to all your instances, you can just click on this icon here that says disconnect. That will disconnect from your instance. And then to exit the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, you just click on File and there's an option here to exit. In this video, I showed you how to connect to an instance of SQL Server using SQL Server Management Studio. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.